So in between season 1 and 2, I lived in New York at the time. I went and I had a meeting with the social media manager for sci-fi. So the person who like ran all the various Twitters, but they ran the Twitters for like 24 shows and the network and for a bunch of actors. And so they just had this incredibly complicated thing. And the thing I will admit to now, what is it, nine and a half years later, almost 10 years later, um, is that he had a post-it note on his desk with a login for the Z Nation official Twitter.
Thank you for joining us today on the Downing Cut. Today's guest is Daniel Schaeffer, who is a multifaceted creative professional blending his expertise as a writer, photographer, and an industry specialist. His work spans from contributions to major TV series like Black Summer and Z Nation to running his photography business, outlieриmagery.com, and we'll put that in the link in the notes, while also teaching and consulting in the field. Welcome to the Downing Cut, Daniel. How are you?
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you because I know that Black Summer's on Netflix. Z Nation's a huge hit. So I just want to say that right now you're a celebrity, and we appreciate you coming on.
I'll take that. I'm definitely one of those people who prefers to be behind the scenes.
Sure.
I definitely, as someone who both grew up on sets and both my parents are also filmmakers, and so I've been on
Oh.
set since I was a little kid. So I've always known what side of the camera I wanted to be on, and it's not the one where the glass is pointing. I'll put it that way.
Well,
I definitely I like being the guy in the shadow.
that is our first question about, and you just kind of gave us a little sliver. Is like, how did your journey start? What brought you into this domain?
So yeah, family business is the core of it. So my mother is Rochelle Schaefer. Also, you can find her under Rochelle Friedman or Rochelle Rosette. She's a writer, director, producer. She did things like Blossom, 30 something. Is well known sort of for her work in that era of sort of early days, late 80s, early 90s television. And then my father is a showrunner, writer, producer. He has done things like Z Nation, which we worked on together, as well as Eureka and The Dead Zone, a couple episodes of Monk. He's been all over the place. Both of them are definitely old school industry insiders. They have been at it for a very long time. And there's a running joke that there's only two kids in the film industry who have both parents who have won a Writers Guild Award. I'm one of them, and the other one's my little brother. And so a well-decorated family that has earned their stripes. But in that regard, so I grew up on sets. I got to spend time on the Dead Zone set, on the Ghost Whisperer set. Really anything that my family was working on, I would end up in those offices, in those casting sessions on those sets. But in the long run, as I sort of aged into my own position in the industry, a thing I realized is that, especially for the creative path I was on, with sort of the long-term goal falling in the sort of director-producer world is what I sort of get the most satisfaction out of. I found when I was in high school, I was in a really incredible program at a place called Champs Charter High School in Van Nuys, California. Tiny, tiny little school. It wasn't even an actual school building. It was the old preschool of a Korean Lutheran church that had been converted into a high school. And that high school was incredible, really made a huge difference for me. I grew up with learning disabilities. I grew up with a lot of sort of issues that made corners of the education hard coming out through LAUSD. But that school really let us sort of carve our own paths. And when I was there, I was in the drama program, which was one of the highest rated drama programs in the country at the time. I helped found the radio station. I found myself working all across the film magnets and even sort of was the first official photo multimedia student. And that was born out of being an actor and being dirt broke and wanting to sort of carve my path on a couple things. and then realizing that, oh, I have all my friends need headshots. My dad's got an old camera. I'll just grab the camera and for $60 at lunch, I'll shoot your headshots.
Oh, that's awesome.
And luckily, it was a school of about 800 theater kids, so I did pretty well do headshots at lunch. But that led to me being able to buy professional equipment and steer myself down that path. And because of sort of that narrative element to photography and the immediacy with which you could get critique and sort of increase that learning curve, I really found it satisfying creatively. And we're working on a short film or working on a movie, there's months and months at a time before you get your next critique. And I didn't have the speed at which I wanted to learn. But photography, I could throw things on Facebook the night I shot them and get feedback immediately. And so it let me sort of carve my style very, very quickly. And I haven't left the house without a camera in my pocket since. I was walking around today with my RX1R and
Nice.
just having pictures, even just while I was waiting for the mechanic to finish my Land Cruiser. But yeah, so I sort of found myself drifting down this photography path and found it very satisfying. So I shifted out of the drama world, the drama program that I was in high school. Got into photography. That led me to Parsons in New York City. And then I sort of came up of my own parallel career, not calling on any favors with my folks and just sort of building my own network in the photo and commercial production world. So I came up in New York as a PA, then as a staffing manager, as an optics specialist, as a workshop trainer, all sorts of different things in that world. And was able to sort of establish myself as someone who could run crews and who could hire talent and could put something together. And after a little over 10 years of doing that on the road, so New York being my home base and ping-ponging all around the country, I was in a different city an average of every two and a half weeks. Worked in, I think, 33 different major cities across America, countless little towns. I remember at one point I did some accounting and I've driven cross-country 55 times. And so I know this exact pretty well at this point.
Yeah.
So just had this incredible opportunity to sort of be out in the world and do things in a fashion and a flexibility that a lot of people have not gotten the chance to do. But then come sort of the post-COVID era, really felt like I wanted to settle down, wanted to be in a place that I found supportive and satisfying and be around people in a community that I really saw value in and saw like worthwhile investment in being there. And after years of working on Z Nation as a writer and photographer and sort of semi-producer on that, we shot that entire show here in Spokane, and I just fell in love with the town. I fell in love with the community, and it was the obvious choice. So back in 2021, I made it full-time here. I've been here about half the year, on and off throughout the course of from like 2013 onwards. But yeah, made it full-time in 2021 and have not looked back. Really just love sort of the life that I'm able to put together.
Have you gotten used to the heat?
Absolutely. So I came up from California where that sort of so like what it's only like 92 outside right now. That's fine. My running joke is in California, I was the only sweaty one because everyone like Botoxes their sweat glands closed. In New York, everyone's sweaty. We're all just sweaty, disgusting, humid. The humidity in New York is infinitely worse than like 75 degrees and humid in New York is worse than 113 here in Spokane. And yeah, like I've got air conditioning. I literally, I just picked up my car from the shop today because I wanted to make sure my AC was going full blast. But yeah, the heat is nothing. And if anything, I actually really love the fact that I get 4 real seasons here. In LA, it's just like 75 degrees and kind of meh all year round. So you end up in sort of this, in a weird way, almost this like emotional stasis. Like you don't feel like things are moving forward, like, and you feel very stagnant at times.
Yeah.
But here, the fact that I'm getting like spring, summer, winter, fall, and doing it all over again and all over again, like, is actually like genuinely good for my mental health and honestly for my creativity, because I'm entering these new scenarios every couple of months that are sort of forcing secondary thought processes. Even like an example I gave with that the other day is it was just like brutally hot, and I was just like I can't remember what I was looking up. I was looking up something like cold, trying to find the name of something, and just stumbled across a YouTube video about it's a little town in Alaska where every single person lives in the same building. It's like one giant apartment building dormitory that has the grocery store and the bars and the
Wow.
computer store. Everything's in one building because the weather there is so cold. And immediately that just shook loose because I was like trying to think cold thoughts. I was like, oh, that had actually, and I literally like over the course of an hour came up with a horror film that is set in that setting that I never would have
Oh,
stumbled
nice.
into had I not been trying to think cold thoughts. So, yeah, having that sort of modification in my creativity is great. And again, if someone who never leaves the house without a camera, it's nice to have something different to look at, even if you're looking at the same stuff every couple of months. Like there's like my drive to work is different, like fundamentally different every 2 weeks here.
Yeah.
And I've taken photos of the same damn tree probably 400 times, but they're all interesting. So
What about the fires and smoke? I mean, is that? I mean,
good luck
talk
getting away
about.
from that anywhere. Like we've got it here absolutely, but they
Yeah.
had it work in New York City last year. When we were
Oh,
up in Calgary shooting Black Summer, we had it horrifically up there. I think if you're trying to get away from heat and smoke, you're on the wrong planet. I think we're
yeah.
past that.
Well, let's. I know this is for people who are interested in filmmaking and stuff, so I'll steer us back. Let me
Absolutely.
before I ask you my first basically my first question is, but it's about writing. How did you get into that role?
So again, that's sort of the family business. Both my parents are writers. And so from a very young age, I was given an incredible degree of access to them as mentors. And also just to sort of their creative value system, if you will, as to like what were the pathways. And what's interesting is I've talked about this with both my parents. My mother she writes for the like because it is her drive and like her deep satisfaction. My dad writes because it pays and because it has a pension,
Yeah.
like health and benefits. And I'm kind of right in the middle there. That in a lot of ways, where I get my sort of creative satisfaction is less tied to the creative elements, and in a lot of ways more tied to the elements. Like my writing jokes, if I could never take another photo or write another script again, I would be perfectly happy as long as I could get people work. And in a lot of ways, I write more to generate potential projects to put our team out here to work than I do for really my own creative satisfaction. But at the same time, I get a really incredible level of satisfaction out of writing on my own terms. So getting to create
Okay.
stories that follow my value system and that follow things that I find interesting because sort of a thing that I consider myself very lucky in having access to is just an incredibly wide spectrum of experience, both practical and impractical in a lot of ways.
Sure.
So because of that, I feel like I have access to different pathways to conceptualize things than a lot of people do. So when I can come up with a story, I'm able to come at it from a very unique angle, from a deeply empathetic angle, to be able to think about the motives of the characters first and foremost, almost more than the circumstances. So to be able to find circumstances to function with the motives and not necessarily like come up with a cool idea for a thing to do and then have to figure out how the characters would respond. Like to me, it's I'm coming up with how the characters respond and what those responses would be interesting, and then figuring out what they're responding to almost. So
Nice.
playing it sort of backwards
Yeah.
functionally, but that actually leads to, at least in my book, much more compelling writing. For example, on Black Summer. So Black Summer, I was one of four writers on that. It was a very small team. We were involved in every facet of it. It was a really satisfying production. John Hyams, Abram Cox were incredible to work with, and of course my father. But one of the things I found really exciting is I got to be involved with every single facet of that production and every single script. But then specifically, I was tasked with episode 7 that was my baby. That was the one that I was writing cover to cover on my own. And so episode 7 of season 1 is called The Tunnel. And for me, the goalpost of it was your main character, like their whole season arc comes to its crescendo 2/3 of the way through this episode. And that's like, so everything that John and Abram have been setting out for the first 2/3, like Carl and John wrote the pilot, and then Abram and John checkerboarded for the rest of the season. And then I wrote episode 7, because John and Abram were also directing all the episodes. And then episode 8 is the finale, and Carl and I, or I can't remember, it was either Carl and I or John, Carl and I wrote the finale. And so I was getting to do a really interesting thing, which is I was helping track along the entire way, but now it was my job to satisfy all of the creative foreshadowing that had occurred all season. It was my job to turn that into this beacon moment that defined the character. So that's a massive amount of responsibility, one that was very daunting and exciting to take on.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I'm like, and again, it's not to talk sort of out of turn, but I really love the script I wrote. But the way that, just to show that it's a collaborative process, the way it was interpreted by the actor, I, in the end, was not as satisfied by. That actor sort of took things and ran with it on their own in a way that was not particularly collaborative. And that was the case with me, Abram, and John, sort of dealing with this person. So it was, as a writer, it was actually a very important lesson to learn of, like, you pour all of your heart and soul into this element, but then you're handing it off. And you have to have the ability to, like, to me, it does not bother me at this point. When that happened initially, it was frustrating. But then I realized, like, it is out of my hands. I'm part of a process. And until I'm at a point in my career, sort of weight-wise, I can't push back in those moments. I can't raise those arguments. I just have to let them. So as a career exercise, it was a really important moment for me. What's funny is still, even with that mild frustration, like when people were tweeting about the show, they tweeted about that episode specifically often.
Wow.
And even the Stephen King even said it was his favorite episode, and that made my head spin. Like,
I bet
it was pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just that sort of thing of, for me, it was in the first moment where I really had to learn those collaborative elements and the distinction in taking those things personally. And in a lot of ways, luckily, it's allowed me to not take anything personally ever since. It's if things don't go my way, that's just, they weren't meant to go my way. And again, for me, because my satisfaction is not tied to the work, it's tied to the community, it's tied to, it's not tied to the work, it's tied to the effort. But I like the doing of it. I like the being part of the team. I like the being involved of it. So it sort of makes me bulletproof, even if I work on something. Luckily, I have not had to work on anything that I'm not very excited about and very proud of. But in that same context, when I've had to make those compromise positions, it's not as sort of wounding as it would have been when I was earlier.
Did you have any other writers that came to your aid and said, this is kind of normal? Like, is this normal?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My father's got stories about dealing with actors that are truly some of the most horrific, like actors turning in pages that they wrote themselves without telling the writers, and just like producers who were just lying to the crew, and I also, in addition to that, even at that point, I had seen enough of the shenanigans to know sort of, okay, I'm going to let them take it personally, but I'm not going to take it personally. They think they're fighting a war. I'm not even on the same battlefield. Again, there's no reason. It's just movie making. There's no reason to take it that personally. There's no reason to sort of dive into the chaos of it and to allow it to steer your emotions in anything but a positive way.
So let me ask you this then, on those lines, what makes a good actor?
It's sort of the same thing that makes a good actor is the same thing that, to me, makes any good crew member, and that's a collaborative job. For me, and you'll hear me echo this time and time again, it's all about community. And within that context, it's all sort of about the perceived value of participation. When you have a crew, you are navigating the emotions and the priorities and the desires of at minimum, let's say 30 people at maximum, at least in the productions we run here in Spokane. Like Z Nation, we had days where we'd have almost 250 people on the set. And it is your job as anyone sort of in that up the line position of writer, director, producer, technically actor, but I always make some arguments there, to help make sure that everyone's confidence and comfort stays as high as possible. And that their perceived value of participation stays as high as possible. Be that they're being paid their day rate, be that the craft services and the catering are excellent, be that the crew gift is good. There's all sorts of ways to mitigate the difficulty of a chaotic set, because the reality is that there is always the potential for chaos on a set, but also with proper planning and proper time, and allotting the budget in a way that doesn't just reflect putting money in a couple of above the line pockets, but instead spreading that money as equitably as possible across an entire unit so that people feel like their investment is worth it. Those things assuage those fears and increase that comfort in ways that sort of make you bulletproof. I always say, like, when you're spending money, like, spend it on catering before anything else, and then go from there. Because as long as people are well fed, you can have a conversation with a well fed person. But if they're hungry, it's not going to go well.
Right. Did you say something about crew gift? A crew gift?
Yeah. So this is actually, I always joke, to me, this is secretly one of the most important things in almost any industry setting. And so a thing that's relatively standard on television shows and movies, sort of a certain budget. I personally like to see if I can squeeze this into almost any budget I work. Is just some little token of gratitude for the crew and their involvement. Sort of in a lot of ways, almost a badge of honor. Like, for example, I have one here. We did so I run a nonprofit here in Spokane called We Few, Filmmakers of Eastern Washington. We do workforce development and training and just that kind of community support for local filmmakers and people interested in film at any level here in Spokane. We have over 1,000 members. It's a really robust community. We do mixers every month. We do training sets. We do all sorts of things. And so, like, just from we had a training last year or earlier this year, I guess, in March, a show called Cherry, and the crew gift for Cherry was just these fun little
Nice.
cherry pins. Again, just like a little token of gratitude. And for that, the budget for that was like $3,000. There was no extra money for any kind of crew gift. And actually, kind of incredibly, this woman who, let me get it is Winks for Days is their Etsy shop. I'll plug them again. I had actually reached out to them just to see if I could license the design, because I didn't have any budget for a crew gift. And they made these beautiful pins that were like $10, $12 each. But I didn't. I had to buy 50 of them. I had a crew of like almost 60 people, so I needed to have one for everyone. And when I reached out and I was like, "Hey, I'm just wondering if I license this design, so maybe I could, or could I order stickers for you or something?" And they're like, "Well, why? What do you need?" And I'm like, "Oh, well," and I explained that, I run this nonprofit and I make these crew gifts. And they, without hesitation, were like, "Oh, I'll just send you 50 of them." And I'm like, "It's like $600 worth of pens." They're like, no, it's totally fine. I want to support it. And so it was just this incredibly heartwarming thing. And actually, I don't have, but you'll see I have pins of our We Few logo and stickers and stuff. And so, like, very simple things like pins and stickers. And a thing we're working towards on the We Few front is that for our future trainings, we're actually working with some other local nonprofits to, like, design a really good set fanny pack that has our logo on it. So that when these newcomers work our sets and get that experience, that then they have an actual piece of equipment that they can carry forward into something of professional setting, that now they're equipped properly. We're literally trying to even stuff of, I've been on govdeals.com lately, where you have to make an account, but it was worth it to me because I've been bidding on TSA confiscated multi-tools in bulk, that they sell them by the pound. And so for like $200, which is like the price of 2 multi-tools new, I can get them 25 Leathermans, and then be able to give these newcomers, these first timers, a good multi-tool that they can then go forward and use on future productions. And so to me, it's a real token of appreciation. It's not just a gift, but it is a sign of sort of value and respect from the people above the line to the people below the line, which I've always hated sort of that terminology of above the line and below the line. It really bothers me. And so any place that we can sort of find ways to address that dividing line, I always say is worth it. And also, so I'm the one local 600 stills photographer in Spokane, so actually behind the scenes on everything here. And because of that, I actually noticed that, like, for example, we just had a show here in town called Train Greens that was about like a $12 million feature, really beautiful locations out in the middle of the woods, period piece about logging, incredible photos. I got to shoot my own personal glass that was period correct optics for the shoot. So shooting lenses from the 1920s on a project about the 1920s, from the
Wow.
1960s when they were shooting there in the 60s. So like actually matching stuff. It came out beautiful. But one of the funny things is if you look at the behind the scenes photos, you would never know that it's Train Dreams because everyone in the photos is wearing Z Nation merch because the last thing they worked on, they got the Z Nation hoodies and the Z Nation hats. So you just see that logo all over the place. And so like it just shows sort of the long-term legacy is even on a project that was as chaotic and like delightful, but incredibly grueling as Z Nation. Because there's that good sort of totem of goodwill. People remember it very fondly. And so, yeah, the crew gift, as funny as it is a very important thing. As a producer, I personally feel like that's something I have to run, even on very, very small sets. Like I ran a training set last year that we literally had 20 people. And it was about one of the parts about it was about hunters. And so I went actually and I talked to a buddy of mine at the gun range who makes keychains of bullets. And they're just like inert bullets that he's made into keychains. So I got 20 of the keychains, and everyone who worked that set has one of those bullet keychains. But now every time I see one of those people on set, it's like hanging on their keys, it's on their set bag. And so it's that sort of totem of long-term appreciation. And I really think it's something that is worth the expenditure.
Oh, I love that. I love that. It brings unity and camaraderie. So
exactly. And also just like stuff like stickers, like you can get, like I have right here. So Z Nation, one of our main locations was a place called Kaiser Aluminum. I don't know if that's in focus.
Yeah.
But Chris Bovey, a local artist, did these amazing designs of the original sort of about Kaiser Aluminum. And I commissioned from him as a special little like Z Nation Insider thing, a zombified version of the logo because we shot awesome. The abandoned aluminum foundry, this 75-acre aluminum foundry as our main location. And so I've been giving these out saying I'm giving these to the Kaiser survivors. So any Z Nation crew members watching this, definitely call me and come get yours because I've got a stack here. And we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary. We actually are carrying a really awesome event with the Garland Theater here in Spokane on September 15th. That'll have a panel and a mixer and all these things, and then a screening that night. So it is, like I said, high chaos, but an incredible amount to be proud.
So your role as a writer and photographer for Black Summer and Z Nation blends into visual storytelling with narrative crafting. How do you balance these dual roles, and how does each influence each other?
So it sort of comes down to the difference between creation and capture. So my role on set as a photographer, I always talk about the driving force behind all of my work, be it writing, be it photography, be it producing, be it really, even in like when I worked in sales capacity, is sort of the driving force is this concept I call inherent narrative. That every single one of us, you, me, when we approach a situation, we're coming at it with whatever our personal backstory is. And that steers how we perceive things. So, for example, as a photographer, when I take a photograph, I know how I'm responding to it, but I have no idea how you would respond to it. Sort of the hope is that your response is at least at the same level of emotional resonance as my response. So we're hitting that same sort of level, but it could be from a completely different place. An example I always have of that is one of my favorite photos. If you go through my website, is of two little kids on a subway train, and the little boy is blowing bubbles, and the little girl is like trying to pop them, and the mother is sort of looking on affectionately. And like I said, I don't use the Hasselblad camera, and I tend to, when I photograph people, I tend not to ask them first. I tend to sort of approach. I always say approach with benevolence. Take the photo. If they ask you about it, introduce yourself. Like I will always interact with people that I photographed. I will never take photos of someone. I have a pretty hard rule against I never photograph homeless people. I never photograph people in distress. But as you're sort of I had a cold this week, so my nose is a little itchy. But as you're moving forward with this, if you move with benevolence, people will treat you accordingly. And so in that moment, there's these two little kids, and I just approached the mother and just sort of signaled her, like, can I take you? And she was like, "Yeah, go ahead." Because like I'm a big strange man with a beard and a camera.
Right.
Like I can totally understand not responding well to that. But I walk up with a smile. I specifically shoot with very small, sort of unassuming equipment. Stuff that looks older, stuff that is a little bit more beat up. It doesn't look like some big shiny long lens. I always say when I teach street photography, I teach a street photography workshop series. And one of the things I always preach in that is focal length is equivalent to creepiness. So if you're on a 28 millimeter and I'm like within 5 feet of you, I don't really seem that creepy. If I'm on a 200 across the street, what the hell is my problem? Even though the frame is the same, it's just that sort of sneakiness. So moving with benevolence, moving with clear intention, and not seeming suspicious is 3/4 of the battle. So like, I'm taking this photo because it feels meaningful, not because I want it. Is sort of the thing, and I want to get that family that photo as quickly as possible. So like, give them my car, I exchange info with them, and then I don't just email them the photo. I try to send them a physical print. I came up as a technician. I can't tell if you can see, but there's this whole wall is prints that I have in process that we put up on the walls here at the studio. But so that photo, though, I always use as an example of inherent narrative, because to me, the narrative immediately was it's family, it's this very loving thing, it's the two children engaging in this moment. And I'm from New York, so the public transit of it all is very familiar. And I then talked to someone about that photo years later at a workshop, and their take was so different because they grew up in a circumstance where they had never been on public transit. And so they were like, oh, it's so dirty and depressing, and those kids just seem so out of place, and it's such a sad photo. And I'm like that was so different. And they were having the same level of emotional involvement as I was, but just at a completely different angle. And so again, that sense of inherent narrative is no matter what the story is, we all bring something different to it. So as a photographer, it's my job to sort of clarify these images and solidify something that has a strong enough baseline sense of inherent narrative that no matter what the reaction is, that the reaction is hyped, that it feels intense, it feels valuable, and it feels that you react to it the way you would react to good art. As a writer, it's sort of my job to both play that angle and potentially subvert it. Because the thing is, as a photographer, at least in the way I shoot, I don't like creating my scenarios necessarily, unless it's a portrait or something like that. I personally find that sort of reportage nature, that sort of F8 and be there, old school photographer thing. If your photo's not good enough, you're not close enough sort of mentality. I love that. To me, some that being in those real moments is where I get the satisfaction photographically. But as a writer, you then play those elements off of utilizing tropes, utilizing themes that are familiar to people, and either leaning deeply into them so those things feel very distinct, or undercutting them and subverting them. And so playing those angles. So, like, for example, one of my favorite elements of Black Summer, and we got so much shit for it, I'm glad we did, and we deserved it, but we knew that going in. Was my favorite character of that entire series is Kyung-sun, the refugee. When we wrote the original, did the original outline, none of the characters had names. They all had functions. And so her character was listed as, none of them had physical descriptions. None of them had names. None of them had races, colors, creeds. A few of them had genders, but that was specific to the narrative. And so the original characters was, Rose was the mother. Spears was the imposter. Chung-san was the refugee, and so on and so forth. But specifically, I was really drawn to the refugee because the way we had planned it from the get-go is that we wanted to cast someone from any number of backgrounds. So we had sort of an open call, but the key things is we wanted them to be a woman. We wanted them to be petite. We wanted them to be like physically small. they had to be able to, when they were running, look like they were running like hell. Like really, like not just someone like actor running, like someone who could run. And then the key thing is that they had to believably be from a country that had gone through some kind of refugee crisis or war within the past 20 years. That was sort of the. And the reason why is that the function of that character is that they were supposed to be the only person who knew the right answer. That throughout the course of things, if you track everything that Kim Sun does through season 1 especially, she's the one doing the correct thing, responding the correct way every single time. Because this character is supposed to have been through hell before. So she knows who not to trust. She knows where not to go. She knows how fast she has to move. But she doesn't speak English. And that the core element of the character is that she is the only one capable of surviving in those settings, and yet no one can understand her, nor does anyone try. And as a big piece of that, and people, this is where people gave us shit, is we purposely did not subtitle her. That you never, watching that character, if you look back, it never says, even if you watch it, the only place that she gets subtitles is if you watch it in Korean. That she is subtitled in Korean, like if you watch it in Korean. But otherwise, we wanted the whole idea that the only people who could understand her would be people who spoke the language. And so they would know, oh shit, this is coming, but that the American audience would not. And so the American audience would be on the same place as the American characters, and that the Korean audience would be on the same place as the Korean character. And because of that, it allows for a level of tension and a level of subversion and deception that creatively was so satisfying. And my favorite element of that character that is in episode 7, and if I have a single favorite thing I've ever written in my career, it is this. Is in episode 7, the thing you might realize when you watch the show is you don't learn, most of the characters you never actually even learn their name. Most of the characters, you never get any of their backstory. Like, I don't think that no character specifically says like where they're from, what their deal is. Like, you'll get snippets of it here and there, but no one has like a "this is who I am" sort of speech, except for Kyun-sun. And she, in episode 7, when they're sitting around the campfire, gives the only monologue in the entire series, and it's a 2-page monologue about her and her mother escaping North Korea, and how that during the escape, her and her mother got lost or got separated, and that she had to make it to the United States on her own, and that she's trying to get back to China where she thinks her mother might be. And it's this incredibly tragic, really, it's like truly, it's one of my favorite character pieces I've ever read. And if you don't speak Korean, you do not understand the word, and nor will you find any yeah, exactly. And so it's a really, really creatively, that was so satisfying to me because it put the audience in the same position as the characters on screen, and you so rarely get to play that card in our industry. And so often, in order to make something followable, the audience has to know more than the characters. And because of the tone of Black Summer, we felt like the moment the characters know, the moment the audience knows more than the characters, we have failed. Because then the audience will expect things, and we want the audience as scared as they are.
Yeah, take away that predictability, right?
Exactly.
So, as a social media manager for Z Nation, how did your experience in social media management shape the way you approach storytelling in a series?
So that
you're basically, I'm assuming it's similar to what you were saying before, is trying to find that same level, but you're laughing because I know you have something to tell me.
So that one was funny because I technically, no one knew I was the social media manager for a very long time.
Oh.
So when we did Z Nation, there was a lot of sort of chaos to the hierarchy because we were producing it here in Spokane. The production company, which was the Asylum, was down in Los Angeles, and then the studio or the network was Sci-Fi in New York. And there was very little clarity as to who had access to what. And just on accident, So it was my job to do all the photography. I did all the on-set photography. Me and this one other photographer, Oliver Irwin, great local guy, did all the on-set coverage. And for the first season, like none of those photos went anywhere. They just kind of vanished into the ether. So in between season 1 and 2, I lived in New York at the time. I went and I had a meeting with the social media manager for Sci-Fi. So the person who like ran all the various Twitters, but they ran the Twitters for like 24 shows and the network and for a bunch of actors. And so they just had this incredibly complicated thing. And the thing I will admit to now, what is it, nine and a half years later, almost 10 years later, is that he had a Post-it note on his desk with the login for the Z Nation official Twitter. And that in the like 30 seconds he walked out of the room to grab something, I took a picture of that. And I logged in, and then I became the social media manager for the next 4 seasons before. And like literally no one knew who was posting. I was posting all the photos officially. They were all cleared. It was my job to be the one clearing them. I was helping manage the live chats and when we would live tweet everyone on the production knew I was the social media manager, but no one knew how no one knew the story of how I had access. But the thing is, no one, because we were an acquired show, there wasn't an official person doing it otherwise. So if you actually look back at the analytics of that Z Nation Twitter, something like 95% of the tweets are from my account, and all the rest of the tweets, there's like 6. The only other tweets are like there's a marathon this weekend, and like no image or anything, just like not even like there's a Z Nation marathon this weekend on Sci-Fi. It's just there's a marathon this weekend, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like me. There was a guy at the asylum did a little bit, and then that was me sort of taking over again, coming from having done social media management for Leica, having done some social media management for a couple other smaller companies in New York, just being like, listen, someone's got to do this. I'm the one with all of the photos. It might as well.
Yeah, might as well. Now you've been running outlierImagery.com as a photographer since 2009.
Yeah.
How has maintaining your own business influenced your creative choices? Any larger, more collaborative projects like this?
It's been interesting. So Outlier Imagery effectively is sort of the umbrella that I do any of my photography work through. And in a lot of ways, I actually kind of long-term intended it to be more of a photo agency. So all of the work on my site is on outlierImagery.com is my photography. But one of the key things I've done throughout the course of that is manage photo teams and social media teams. One of my favorites, for example, is I was the staff photographer and social and media team manager for the Brave New Voices International Youth Poetry Slam for almost 15 years.
Nice.
And it was one of my favorite jobs I ever had. I started as one of the youth poets. I was on the Los Angeles Slam team in 2010. And then what ended up happening was our team didn't even make it. So it's a week-long event of workshops and classes and sort of these sort of networking things. But then specifically a ton of performance and then a competition, like an actual slam. And so Los Angeles team.
Describe what a slam is for some of the people that don't know.
For the uninitiated, a slam is multiple teams or multiple poets performing their live poetry and then having judges score the poetry and there's a winner at the end. It's head-to-head slam poetry. And it's one of those things that, yes, it is undeniably cheesy, but it is also inarguably to me some of the most impressive art coming out of young Americans that I've ever seen. So when I started, I was, what was that? It was 2010. So I was, someone else do the math. I'm dyscalculic. I literally can't do the math in my head, but I was born in 93. So whatever that makes me. And so I was there, and I'd just gotten one of my first professional cameras. I'd gotten a Nikon D7000, a good prosumer setup with a 24 millimeter lens.
Nice.
And as the competition started, our team got knocked out early, and we didn't even make it out of quarterfinals. Now, this event every year has 800 youth poets from between 30 and 50 teams from all over the country and a few from all over the world. And so we didn't get knocked out because we weren't any good. We got knocked out because everyone was good. So all of a sudden I find myself sort of like just with a lot of free time and this new camera. So I'm just taking photos. I'm just snapping pictures of everything. And for me, one of the driving forces of my work, and again, I teach this in my classes, is 3/4 of good art is access, is having the ability to be somewhere that someone else is not, and being able to lend a lens and a narrative to a setting that someone otherwise would not have access to. And especially in settings where there are multiple photographers and multiple videographers, like photojournalism, like concerts, like things like that. If I can be somewhere where the other ones are not, that gives me a distinct creative advantage. So in Brave New Voices, all the photographers are like right up front, they're in the audience, stuff like that. And I'm an old theater kid, so I know how these old theaters are sort of built. So I start sneaking behind the scenes. And so I start taking pictures from backstage, start going up into the catwalk and shooting down. And for one shot, I snuck up the poet was in front of the curtain, and I snuck up behind the curtain, and I laid down on the ground, and the photo is actually of the feet of the poet with the out of focus audience in the background, but with the curtain, like curtains, the top third, the feet of the poet are the center third, and then the audience and the stage are the lower third. And so I'm taking that photo, and someone grabs my collar and like yanks me up. And they're like, "Who are you? What are you doing back here?" And it's this woman, Jonah Sato, who is this incredible community organizer and filmmaker in the Bay Area, and one of the organizers of the festival. And I go, "Oh, I'm a staff photographer." I just lied to my team, just out of panic for not wanting to get kicked out. "Oh, I'm a staff photographer." You go, "Oh, okay," and just leaves me alone. Cut to like 3 days later, we're at the final slam, which is at the Fox Theater in Oakland, which is in the top 5 most beautiful theaters in North America. It's this incredible space. And I go and I'm about to sit down with the rest of the LA team, and Joan waves me down. She was like, "What are you doing back there? We got a spot for you in the pit." And that they cleared out the orchestra pit just for me. And they weren't planning on clearing out the orchestra pit, but they were like, "Oh, that photographer would probably like it there." And so I got to
Oh,
speak
that's
with them
awesome.
from the orchestra pit and just got these incredible photographs. Like literally, we're like they had set up the mic like almost at the edge of the stage, so I was shooting directly up from underneath the poets. But the photos were incredible, and it was so satisfying. And I immediately got home, and that night, like literally on my laptop in the dorm, I uploaded like color corrected and uploaded probably 1,000 photos, and I put them all on Facebook. 2 days later, I'm back in Los Angeles, like getting ready to go back to school, and I get an email from a guy named Nick James, who's the media manager at the time for. He did all of the um, artwork and so sort of signage and stuff or like all the brand identity stuff for Youth Speaks and Breaking Voices at the time. He goes, "Hey man, those photos are incredible. Who the fuck are you?" I'm just like, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to lie. Blah, blah, blah." And I sort of explained myself, apologize. He's like, "No, no, no, no. We want to hire you next year."
Wow.
And so from that point on, the next year I came back in an official capacity. And then the year after that, I started teaching these workshops. And so I asked the organization, "Hey, could I teach a workshop and see?" Because I'm seeing other youth poets with DSLRs, and it's like the early days of Canon video and stuff like that. And I'm seeing 7Ds and stuff floating around and Nikon D90s. I'm like, "Can I just see if anyone wants to take a sort of a photography and art workshop? Because there's a whole day of the festival is workshops." They go, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And so I taught one called Iconography of a Movement. And there's sort of about how, as a photographer, it's your job to boil down historical moments into these sort of like digestible bites that have everything you need to know about that moment in time in that photograph. And using photos by James Knockway, photos by Mary Ellen Mark, photos by really all of the great sort of photojournalists and portraitists at the time. And amazingly, that first year, I had just 4 or 5 students showed up. But out of that 4 and 5, I was then able to convince Youth Speaks. I waived my personal fee, and I said "Hey, let me hire them. Let me hire these like 14, 15. I was only 17 at the time, I think. I was like, let me hire these like 14, 15-year-old kids to be on the media team next year and help me build out the team." So that next year there was 3 students and me. The year after that, it grew. The year after that, it grew. And the last year that I personally helped run this was 2019 in Las Vegas.
Wow.
That team, I think there was 8 photographers, there was 16 videographers, there was a full editorial team, there was 6 dedicated social media people. It was a huge squad, and shooting for a week-long event in Las Vegas where we're shooting from 7 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night and editing the imagery and cutting the video, post-processing and posting it same day. So we
Wow.
had this incredible workflow going that just yielded these images that to me felt incredibly important, because these are some of the most talented young writers and creators I've ever met. These 800 new students every year. And to me, having them have access to incredibly high quality imagery of themselves and videos of themselves is game changing for them career wise. And I was able to watch that firsthand, where people were using our photographs in their personal marketing materials. We're using the videos that we shot in their college applications. We're using content we had recorded for any number of things. And I'm in contact with almost everyone who has ever used one of my photos to represent themselves to this day. And nothing to me as a photographer is more exciting than when someone chooses my imagery to represent themselves. Be it on Facebook, be it on LinkedIn. I always joke that the greatest compliment you can ever give a photographer is by using a photo they took of you on a dating profile. Because that's where you're really trying to show yourself in your best light. So if I took your Tinder profile photo, I've done a good job. I've represented you well. So for me, it's all about the photo side of my career has always been anchored to helping people represent themselves, helping stories represent themselves in very clear, concise, and iconic ways at every turn.
How did that lead you into becoming a brand ambassador and consultant at Leica? And then knowing that, how does that your approach to photography, particularly in the high stakes environment of television production and also the technology that's involved and then the art, how does that all blend in?
So before I worked at Leica, when I was living in New York, I became a vintage optics specialist working with Calumet, ENH, and Atlanta. So I was a sourcing guy and worked for Calumet for a number of years, just before that, right up until they closed, sourcing high-end vintage optics and repairing them and working inside that sort of sphere. And so getting to work with incredible lenses, like going all the way back to the 1800s, cinema lenses that would worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was literally talking about today. I once got a vintage Korean Zoom that was probably worth $500,000 plus, that someone had dropped off of the side of a boat and needed cleaned. And so I had in my little like $700 a month New York apartment that was like the size of a shoebox. I had this lens taken apart and in like vinegar baths to get the salt water off. In my sink, in my tub, like everywhere but the toilet. And so just like that was part of the ecosystem. So I came up as this vintage equipment specialist, and really loving the look of those lenses and not really enjoying sort of the sterility in modern lenses. And so that translated into getting to do a couple of workshops with a photographer named Eric Kim, who's like one of the big names in sort of street photography. And when I first met him, this is just sort of when we were both starting out. And I actually taught him a bunch of, he sort of took one of my visual workshops. And then my father and I used to run a gallery in downtown Los Angeles, and we were able to host one of his official workshops at the gallery.
Wow.
And that gallery was sponsored by Leica, and I met a guy named Ebby Quene, who is a lifetime, rest in peace now, he passed away a couple years ago. But he famously, he had 2 Porsches, one that had the license plate Leica 1, the other was Leica 2. He was the main West Coast brand ambassador for Leica, it's effectively, I think, for almost 60 years. Like incredibly embedded. And so he and I became close. I had borrowed some equipment from him. I ended up buying some equipment from him. And I grew up, like my main cameras often when I was back in the film days were all rangefinders, but they were all sort of busted up I was very rough and tumble with my gear because I knew how to fix it. I wasn't worried about resell or anything. If it was my personal equipment, I'm going to use the hell out. And so I happened to move back to Los Angeles at exactly the same time that they were opening the Leica store in Los Angeles. And I reached out to Ebby and I'm like, hey, do you guys need salespeople or anything like that? And what was interesting is every other salesperson they had hired came from a luxury sales background, but I came from a Leica background, came from a photography background. And so they hired me initially just as someone who could speak to the equipment from day one and didn't have to be trained on any of the gear for sale. And luckily, in that first year, I did almost like $2 million in sales at that store. So like, found I had a knack for selling stuff. Found I had a knack for the more formal workshop settings, and started helping teach workshops and stuff like that. And sort of became sort of what they referred to as the direct VIP brand ambassador. So anytime we had a high scale photographer client, someone who knew the camera equipment specifically. So we're talking DPs, we're talking actors who sort of knew the gear better. It was my job to liaise with them and help them get the equipment they needed. But also if they needed to like do these like very kind of simple one-on-one workshops, just work with them to sort of get to know the equipment better. They had to work with people like Steven Tyler, Don Mayer, Jason Sudeikis was a longtime client. I'm still working with him every so often. But then also an incredible range of DPs, and was the direct contact for people like Peter Turnley, the photographer, and Joel Meyerowitz, and a bunch of other photographers who, because they needed photo-specific help, if they went to any of the other sales associates, at least at first, now they're all incredibly, all of them know exactly how to deal with the equipment. But initially, those other sales associates all came from a luxury sales background, so didn't necessarily know, all right, I can sell this guy this 3514, but why should I sell him the 3514? And I knew the why. Yeah, I was with them for a little while and had a great time. And sadly, the shift for me is Leica drifted away from being an actual camera company and changed their mission statement so that they were now a luxury lifestyle brand. And when that shift happened, this right around when they released the Leica T, because that sort of silver touchscreen camera, and I just sort of saw the writing on the wall from the photographer side of things. And that same year, they released a Lenny Kravitz special edition camera that, much like a pair of jeans, came pre-distressed. So Leica famously, over time, they made it brass. So when you use them over time, sort of the badge of honor you get is that the top plate scuffs off and the black paint goes away to show the gold, the brass below. And this was a camera that for $30,000 you could buy, where someone in the factory had just taken sandpaper to it and made it look like you had used it. So there was just some sort of baseline value changes that I saw the writing on the wall, and I was like, hey, this is not what I want to be lined up with. And it timed out well, because that's exactly when Nation fired up. And so I had other opportunities, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to take these and run with them. So that was sort of my thought process. So yeah, they were a ton of fun to work with. I got to work with them in Los Angeles, got to work with them in Florence, Italy. All the time. What was funny is I moved to Florence, Italy for a chunk there, and still consulted for them on their workshop setting, specifically when they were opening the Florence store in 2013. But the entire time I was shooting this exact Sony RX1R, and also the prototype of it, because at the time I was a prototype tester for Sony. So all of my cameras at the time had, and so let me see if I actually still have all of my cameras back then, and still do to this day, have been debranded so that my manager wouldn't get mad. So this, instead of saying Sony, it just says Cama. And so that was just hilarious. Just like let's my brand loyalty is very thin. And I still, what's funny is I love Leica lenses, but actually personally, there's only like really out of all of the Leica lenses in the world, there's really only 3 that I actually enjoy the look of. Like the 1940s, or it might be a little earlier, but sort of that older era 51.5 Scimitar. The 35 Summilux pre-aspherical from the 1960s is my favorite lens of all time. And then a close second to that is the now modern 28 millimeter f2 Summicron, which to me is that's the best 28 millimeter. And for me, if I have those 3 lenses, I can shoot 90% of what I want. And so that's often those 3 lenses. That's sort of my dream kit. 2 of them I don't have at the moment. My Summilux is the 35 is on my main A7S, but The other two are definitely wish list items once I have a little extra cash.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's awesome. When looking in retrospect, when you look back at the kind of the technical skills that you've learned, the stories, the writing, everything, what do you find that you draw from the most in this journey that have really stuck to you and made you who you are today?
The core of it's always putting people before anything else. Just making sure that the people around you feel supported and feel like you're listening to them. I always say, like, I have the excellent combo of being a little bit deaf and a lot of bit Jewish. And so I have a tendency of accidentally talking over people. And it's not that I'm intending to talk over you, but it's that literally my brain, like I have a little bit of an auditory processing issue. So sometimes someone will say something to me. And unless I know they're saying something to me, my brain literally won't even kind of recognize it. And so it'll be like a click, click, like, oh, someone said something. So then there's like a little delay. Um, I didn't find that out until I was like 25. That's like an actual diagnosable thing that, like, oh, your brain
What?
is not always listening. No, I was
Interesting.
dating a girl who her last girlfriend had been deaf, and so a friend of hers was like, Daniel's always talking over people, and this girl had never had. And she was like, no, he doesn't. And the reason why is because she would always tap me before she talked to me, so I would always know to listen to her, but no one
Oh,
else would
okay.
do that. And so I would end up talking over other people. So it was a very funny sort of thing. But anyhow, yeah, making sure that the people around you feel supported, making sure that every voice is heard as often as possible, but also that people know if there are voices that need to be prioritized in given situations. Um, for me, as someone who's sort of my deepest satisfaction is in running teams and putting together communities, making sure that those communities feel like fully safe and supported and sort of symbiotic, that everyone is getting something out of the situation, is very important.
Yeah.
And yeah, and a lot of it is past that. It's all sort of those value items of sort of figure out what the balance is when it comes to the kind of equipment you're using, how that equipment affects the image, how that equipment affects the subject. Specifically, like when I do behind the scenes photography, I purposely shoot very small cameras. I'm shooting with Sony A7Ss, and I'm shooting all prime lenses. I'm shooting close. I'm not shooting on long lenses. I'm typically right in there with the camera team and the boom op and stuff like that. Because even something as simple as, and as crazy as this sounds, I never wear black on set. Like, this is the only black shirt I own, and I never wear it on set. Like, and it's because, in a weird way, same reason same thing. I wear like the fluorescent colored glasses because without these glasses, I look like this. Like, it's like I look like I throw bodies off a pier in Boston for a living. Um, and
Without a
so for
smile.
me, it's about softening that look, making my presence known. Because
Mm.
as a photographer, one thing that I found over time is if people feel like you're sneaking up on them, if people feel like almost that you're like being deceptive in any way, they immediately become uncomfortable. And so it's my position to make these people feel as comfortable and supported and seen as possible, especially when a lot of actors are very self-conscious about how they are photographed. So the
Right.
thing I do, even in those moments, is day one of production, I always slip them a copy. I have like a little mini portfolio that just has some of my other photographs from previous productions in it. We have my photographs all over the walls of the studio. Yeah, I think even in the lobby downstairs, there's a television with my photos cycling on it constantly. Just little things to archive in this person's mind that I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then day one, I prioritize. I don't worry about almost anything else on day one except getting one good portrait of that person. Just a genuinely flattering image of them as early as possible. And the second I get that photo, I leave set, I run back to the studio, I print it on a really high quality, like matte 5x7. I put it in a frame, I go back to base camp, and I put it in their trailer. Like, so like when they get
Mm.
back to their trailer, either that night or the next morning, there is a photograph of them that I took with a little looking forward to working with you card with it. And
Wow.
to become someone who is immediately trustworthy to them, because so often a person in that position feels deeply vulnerable. And as the photographer, one of the luxuries of that position is there's a lot of downtime on the set. And so even in addition to being a photographer, often I'm much closer to the physical action than a lot of PAs can even be. So if the actor needs a bottle of water, either they can say that to the director can say that to the AD can say that to a PA, the PA can then run the crafty and get it, the PA can come back and hand it to the AD, hand it to the director, hit it. Or I can hear, hey, they need a bottle of water, and then I just run and grab it and come back. I can come and go from that core right next to the camera much more fluidly than anyone else can. So just applying that sort of secondary level of utility makes a big difference. And also the set photographer in a lot of ways has the highest potential to annoy people on set of anyone. Because to a lot of people on a set, we are very much unnecessary. We're not there for the day-to-day XYZ of it all. Like we're not there to make the movie necessarily. And so a lot of people are like, get out of my way sort of mentality. And so what's funny is like my actual work kit, the entire thing fits in a bag about this big. Like I'm using a Duluth-pack cavalry sack, a little vertical. It's actually a shotgun shooter's haversack from a company called Duluth-pack. Best camera bags in the world, even though they're not camera packs.
Yeah.
But so I use that because it's tight to my body, it's small, it keeps my silhouette small. So even though I'm 6'4", 250 pounds plus, so I'm a looming guy on set. I can still stay sort of small and compact and happy as light. But then I also bring a Pelican case, like a decently sized Pelican case. And a director once asked me, like, what's in your case? I've never seen you open it. And I'm like, oh, I open it up. And it's batteries for the cinema camera. It's makeup wipes. It's screwdrivers. It's all of the other people's peripherals around me. Who these are things that often, like, if something goes wrong, they would have to go all the way back to the work trucks to get that thing. But actually, they know it's in my case. So if the camera guy goes, oh shit, we're low on battery, where's the next battery? Oh shit, we're out of batteries. I can just do the DIT black case and black case and monitor, and they just go and grab the case. Here's all the dumbass stickers. It's got something to solve your problem with.
Wow.
And luckily, I built a relationship with our local crew that they sort of all know that. So all they have to tell me is like, hey, I need to grab this, and they just grab it out of my case. Because I've got something to sort of solve everyone else's issues in that.
Yeah.
Again, just because raising that baseline of goodwill, making people feel like that perceived value of participation is high, makes my job so much easier, so much more comfortable, and makes the images better. Like I'm able to get photographs of actors that no other photographer I know could get because like the actors are inviting me into their trailers, the actors are sitting with me at lunch, the DP is letting me like get right up next to the camera. I'm like the director and the actors are fine with me being in the room during rehearsal. That because I've become this fixture, because I've become this sort of safety net person, again, I have a level of access that no one else has, and it is able to make me give me access to make work that no one else is able to.
I think just from having a conversation with you, I think one thing that also stood out is you have no ego.
No,
I think
no.
that will block a lot of people, right?
Yes,
That's you don't come across pretentious or anything.
I will wear any hat. I always say like I am just as happy to be the producer as I am to be the PA. And like you need me to hook up the honey wagons to my Land Cruiser and drive them to the next set. Sure. You need me to pick up a producer for the airport. Sure. Like I had like whatever needs to get done to get this done. It's a collaborative process. It's a collaborative system. Like literally, I remember on Black Summer, I just kept in my car at all times. I just always have a high fluorescent vest, a high vis vest. That for me, as someone who's driven cross country 55 times as a photographer, you get out on the side of the road pretty often. So it's something I always have. But also, if we need like, oh shit, we have 4 lockup PAs and there's 5 rows that need locked up. I'm like, I got it, and I can just run over and like lock that one up. And then I just need to leave that for like 1 minute to come and take the photos I need, and then I can go back home. So
Wow.
if whatever needs to get done, let's just get it done. And ideally, I'm getting paid for it, but I'm flexible.
Yeah, yeah. So as someone has successfully merged technical expertise, writing, creative expression, photography, what advice would you offer to aspiring photographers and writers, actors who are looking to kind of carve out a unique niche, if you will, in the industry?
So unique is the key part. So for me, a driving element to my equipment expertise and why I put so much value on that so early on is that I'm able to build kits that from the jump make my work so visually different that you can immediately tell it's my work even without knowing it's my work. I'm shooting lenses that no one else is shooting on cameras that no one else is shooting them on in settings no one else is shooting. I'm using gear that makes my life harder on purpose. None of my lenses are autofocused. None of my cameras are automated. Um, Everything I'm running requires a level of specified attention that, to me, that hindrance becomes an advantage.
Yeah.
One of the main pieces of advice I give people is don't be attached to the clarity of your concept. That if there is compromise to be made, that compromise will almost always yield the better product. That getting exactly what you want is great, but it also spoils you for choice. It leaves you in scenarios where then if you can't get exactly what you want, you won't, and you won't get anything. So, like, for example, on Z Nation, we sort of ran things backwards in a lot of ways. My dad calls it the Spokane model of dynamic producing, which is instead of us sitting in the writer's room and being like, oh, let's do an episode on a boat. Let's do an episode and this. Let's do an episode on that. We didn't come up with any of that stuff ahead of time. We would think like, all right, what are the scenarios we need the characters to go through? And then we would talk to our locations managers and be like, what do we have? What are the coolest things that we have? Oh, cool. We have a quarry. Let's write one of the episodes in a quarry. Oh, cool. We have a guy who built a house that looks like a castle. Let's do an episode in the house that looks like a castle. Oh, amazing. We have a mountaintop winery that overlooks a river that looks like the Mississippi River. Let's do that. And working backwards, so we're working with known factors. We're doing things that we know for a fact we can do. I've got a script right now that's out in the world. It's currently on the blacklist and floating around to production companies. It's called Boots and Braces. What's funny is it's not a project I'd ever actually planned on prioritizing in my writing, but it was one that a production company specifically sort of plucked out of my roster a couple of years ago and just asked if I would write it, and I said sure. That deal didn't end up working out for a couple of different reasons, so I ended up pulling the script back and have it on my own again. But that script is a perfect example of every single word of that script and every single location, every single scenario, every single action was preconceived under the context of I know exactly where. I wrote it for Spokane. I wrote it for the market I work in. So I know where I would shoot it. I know what camera I would use. I know what cars I would get. I know what actors I want. But also, when I went to outline, I went to outline with no ego. So I went to outline with function over form. So in function, I knew like, all right, this moment, I need either I need a chase to happen. I don't care if it's a foot chase or a car chase. So then I reached out to my stunt coordinator, who's Alex Terzia, who's the guy who stunt coordinates Z Nation, has done a lot of incredible work on other things. And I was like, hey, I'm working on this thing. Which one you're going to be? Whenever I get this put together, I'm definitely going to hire you as my guy. Like, trust me, there's no one else I'd want to do this with. If we did this, would you rather do, what can you do cooler, a foot chase or a car chase? And his answer was, oh, I want to build a process trailer. Let's do a car chase because that'll give me a reason to build a process trailer. Cool. Nice. I wrote a car chase. And then got to a point where I was like, all right, this thing, I either need an explosion or a big fire. And then I reached out to my VFX guy and I was like, hey, between these two things, between the explosion and a house fire, which one do you think you could do cooler in this scenario? And you could do more convincing. He was like, oh, let's do a house fire. Oh, cool. It's a house fire. And so I literally went through the various departments and those decision points, and I figured out what would have to happen to make each one of those things work. And I just had no ego about what it would look like as long as it did what it needed to do. To that point, when I wrote the characters, each one of the characters is based off of an actual stunt performer here in the Pacific Northwest, because it's a lot easier to find an actor that looks like a stunt performer than it is to find a stunt performer that looks like a specific actor. And when you're doing things that are so aggressive and so safety-minded, like I literally just wrote all the characters to be people that I knew could do it safely. And then I can find actors who I can make look like that in a much simpler way. So sort of, again, approaching it backwards from a
Yeah.
production friendliness scale rather than a secondary system.
So you're beginning with the end in mind,
Yeah.
and how this is all kind of work together,
I'm
right?
trying to, as my mother says, it's the KISS system. Keep it simple, Stephen.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like there's no reason to make it difficult. Why not plan for something that you know for a fact you can do? So then on the day, if you have the luxury of time, if you have the luxury of flexibility, and the DP is like, hey, can we try something? Then you know for a fact you've got it in the can, so you can try something. So if the actor wants to improvise, you can improvise. And so, yeah, it makes a big difference going into it with a very clear sense of how you have to do it. So that way, when you know what to do, there's no need for concern, no need for stress and strain on the part of the casting.
Is being a DP something that you would consider doing
Yes and
for
no.
your own film?
I've done a lot of what I refer to as visual consulting. In a lot of
Mhm.
ways, if it was the old school form of DP. So I'm someone who, again, coming up in the photography world and playing that math, do I know for a fact I can make beautiful frames? Absolutely. Do I know for a fact I can make beautiful frames that are also editorially functional? Not necessarily. Now it's also something like if I'm not the one who has to operate the camera, if I'm directing an operator SDP, then my confidence would go up a little bit. And it's just sort of comes down to if I have the right team, absolutely I would approach it. But in a lot of ways, it's not again where I get the core of my satisfaction. I'm much rather direct. Sheerly because I enjoy the interfacing with the actors and still having some degree of say and just working with a DP that I trust that knows sort of my visual proclivities in order to sort of take that sort of more mechanical, mathematic chunk of it off of mine. I have DP'd a lot of things over the years, a lot of commercial things, a lot of social media things. But I've always sort of avoided DPing other things if I had to be the sole DP. Like the old format where you had a camera DP and the lighting DP. That's something that I'm much more drawn to. Where like I'm not the one touching the camera, I'm not the one touching the lights, but I'm the one telling the camera to go here and the lights to go here and blah blah blah. But again, I get the most satisfaction out of those collaborative elements. So the directing corner of it, I think in the long run is what I'm most in the long run. The thing I find the most delightful is just putting it all together and watching it happen.
Sure.
So like sort of the producer world is kind of what I enjoy the most. So just like that unit production manager, that functional like assembling the squad. But then yeah, also that amplified into the directing world where I'm getting to interface and explain the creative decisions I find really satisfying.
Are you're an extrovert? I would assume.
Yes and no. I
Yep.
always say I'm the world's most talkative introvert. I always
Yeah.
feel like I will never not answer a question. I will always answer any question you ask me, and entirely honestly, I'm done bullshitting. I've done enough of that in my early career.
Yeah.
I've earned my stripes. I don't need to fake it till I make it anymore. And it's just there's no reason in this industry or in this environment to bullshit anymore. And I think
Yeah.
I was definitely a person who, out of fear for my professional well-being and my story and stuff like that, not knowing how people would perceive me, sort of fell into
Right.
those corners when I was younger. But it's just no point. It's just like answer things
Yeah.
honestly, be yourself, move with benevolence. And yeah, for me, like I said, I like starting things and letting them go.
Yeah.
So like I'm never going to be. I've done my time as a performer. I've zero interest in ever being on stage in any capacity. But like I love doing something like being an MC or being an interviewer. Or being interviewed is a lot of fun. But again, like I have zero desire or need to perform. I'm perfectly satisfied having no one know my name, just as much.
Well, that's. I don't know if that's going to happen, but
Yeah, that's how it is.
let's. As we're starting to kind of move forward to docking our ship, I have a few more questions to ask you.
Absolutely.
Are you working on anything in the near future that you want to promote or talk about? Anything you
Yeah.
want to highlight?
So sort of my core efforts nowadays. So with the industry still sort of in a cooling period and warming up, I have a couple of scripts out there in the world. I've got Boots and Braces. I've got a few other projects sort of floating around. But actually, the bulk of my time right now is going towards founding a nonprofit here in Spokane. So a little over a year ago, me and a local filmmaker named Sean Springer started organizing these mixers that just wanted to get everyone back together after COVID. That's about in the middle of the strikes that we realized that there's so many of us who hadn't seen each other in months, if not years. And so just as an excuse to get everyone back on the same page, we just like said, hey, everyone, we're going to be at this bar on Sunday at 3 o'clock. Just roll through. And the first one was in May of 2023 and was just like, I think it was literally 5 people. It was me, Sean, and 3 other people. And at that one, we just discussed like, hey, you know what? There is this missing utility. There's this thing that needs to happen. There's this thing that the community wants. And so we started a Facebook group, and it was called We Few, Filmmakers of Eastern Washington. And of course, I snuck in the Shakespeare reference, but that's just how I operate. But that led to monthly mixers. The next one, we had 20 people RSVP. We had 40 show up. The next one, we had 40 people RSVP. We had 80 show up. And we've just been growing ever since. And currently we have a little over 1,100 members, all in the Spokane and surrounding area, and a really, really active core of people. And everything from sort of filmmaking nerds to weekend warriors to like full-blown union member filmmakers. And what has come out of these mixers was a real desire in sort of the off season to have something to do to get people moving towards their goals. And Spokane is a very interesting town in context that you can move your way into union filmmaking here much faster than almost any other market. There is a need to hit that sort of 85% of our crew being local for the sake of the Spokane or the Washington Film Incentive.
Yeah.
And so if people are taking it seriously, we can get them into the union pretty rapidly. And completely in a completely kosher way. Like these are people who are earning their days, they're earning their keep. But where it took me 12 years to join Local 600, we can get people in significantly faster into most of the units here, just based off the work. And what we started doing is running these training sets where essentially we find a locally written script, find a local director, and staff them up with a team of 30 to 40 crew members of both seasoned professionals and stone cold newcomers, and pair these young people and newcomers of all ages with mentors who are actual department heads here in Spokane. So people like Peter Green, Tom Taylor, really seasoned professionals in the local industry who are donating their time to train up their future employees. And the nice thing is that has pretty immediate results to when we started doing this a little over a year ago. All the jobs that have come into Spokane in the meantime, anytime they've had gaps to fill, Ridge Cowan or Mark Dahlstrom, who are 2 of our main producers here in town, just walk down the hall to knock on my door and say like, hey, we need someone for XYZ. What have you got? And it used to be that I could say like, well, I know this guy is an AC. I know this guy is a sound guy. I know this guy is a grip. But I never worked with them because they were newcomers. They hadn't worked on Z Nation. They didn't work like that. But now, since they have worked on these smaller projects that I've been producing, I can vouch for them directly. So now it's not just that they're known, it's that they're vouched for. It's that they're tested. And they come with a seal of approval and a degree of confidence that allows Rich and Mark to hire them without hesitation because they know that they know their shit, or that if they don't know their shit, they're willing to learn. And luckily you've had some really incredible results. And one of the things I've been working on most recently, so back in March, I showed you that little cherry den. We shot Cherry, and Cherry was shot on location in the basement of the Northtown Mall, in the abandoned bumper car, mini golf, and arcade that is sitting under the Northtown Mall and has been abandoned since 2009. Delightfully creepy, really like funky space. It's just full of like all this stuff from old abandoned stores and the arcade and stuff like that, just down there. And so we found the place kind of intriguing. And so we asked them all, like, hey, what's the deal with this? Is anyone renting this? And they're like, no, it's just sort of down here. It's just kind of costing us money. And so as a nonprofit, we reached out and said, like, hey, if you guys left all the cleaning and organizing and this and that and the other to us, could we work out something? Because essentially what they said is that in order to get it to a place where they could rent it to businesses again, it was just an incredibly expensive and time-consuming thing to get this space together. And so I was like, well, what if we left it kind of DIY, we took over it. What could we work out if we wanted to turn this into a community access film arts and media space? And so the past couple of months, that's what we've been working on, is working out a deal with the mall to take over that
Wow.
basement. And the current name, this may change, we're calling it the Swamp, the Spokane Workshop for Arts and Media Partnerships.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it will be a multimedia space that has access for film, that has access for, we'll be putting some art studios down there. We'll be putting woodworking and maker equipment down there. We're working on building Andrew Beckler, one of our local editors, is turning one of the rooms into a fake 90s video store to shoot a pilot
Oh,
in.
nice.
We have classrooms down there. And it's all in this like 24-hour secure in the mall. We're directly below the food court, so anyone who needs a snack can just run upstairs. And it's this really interesting space. And knock on wood, we're just trying to work out a deal with the mall where we have sort of a nice low rate that we can sustain and sign a 5-year, 10-year lease and turn that into a space that anyone in Spokane has access to for free. That you can come down and use it as a shooting stage. You can record podcasts. You can use the woodworking equipment. You can rent props. You can rent equipment. Eventually, we would like to have things like editing days and stuff down there. Just find the level of local investments has been incredible. And our next step is just trying to find business partners here locally that can help us sort of support that financially. Like actually, I'm not on a financial note, but we had a great meeting today with a company called Lynch Northwest, again, and Casey Lynch, who's a local artist and artisan who makes these really awesome, like high-end titanium multi-tools. Here, I'll show you. So like, this is one of the ones he already makes. And they're
nice.
high bars and multi-tools that are incredibly durable and really, really well thought out. But they're all just like pry bars or for specific uses. And I've been buying these tools for years. And so I reached out and I was like, hey, I didn't realize we were in Spokane. I run a filmmaking nonprofit. Would you be interested in collaborating on a cinema tool? Because a thing that, as you know, as a gear nerd, there's not really a good single tool for working on your equipment and caging and having your flathead screwdriver and having this wrench and that. So we're working on, just like this, designing like a thin titanium pocket tool, maybe even designing a couple of different versions, like a camera-centric one, a grip-centric one, a rigging-centric one, and just working to design something that anyone can have in their pocket and have at the ready, and can have our little stamp on it and be a Spokane collaboration between Northwest and you. We've got all sorts of plates spinning. Our next mixer is August 18th. The next one after that's going to be really fun because it's September 15th, and it's going to be the 10-year anniversary of Teen Nation. Lines up with it perfectly. So we're actually partnering with the Garland Theater, which is a beautiful theater here in Spokane that was restored recently by local people. That we actually helped with some of the restoration efforts, members volunteering to help clean space. But we will be doing a panel with all of the local crew who wants to come through, sort of a town hall style panel at the theater for all of the local newcomers, as well as all of the established crew. We will then have our normal monthly mixer. Again, that's September 15th. The panel would be at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. The mixer would be at 4 o'clock. And then we do a screening of sort of what we call the Z Nation movie, which is top of season 3. Not exactly the 10-year anniversary thing, but it's sort of the best standalone. You don't have to explain all the backstory to people at the Z Nation. That's what we're going to show. And so she'll wrap up the night showing that and just have a lot of fun as a local film community, just getting out as many people as we can to have a sort of a fun night to commemorate a project that really brought us all together here. So we're spinning a lot of plates and wearing a lot of hats and just trying to figure out how we can make a living doing it and have as much fun as we can along the way.
That's awesome. So one of the questions I ask everyone that interviews with me is, "What is your favorite tech?" I want
Well,
you to answer.
that's an interesting angle because for me, that 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 shifts around a lot. If it comes down to a single piece of tech utility, I'm gonna take kind of a funny. It's not. It might be a cop out, but it's not entirely going to be a cop out. I'm going to say my 1999 Toyota Land Cruiser. That is probably the most used piece of film technology I have in my rig. So I actually run my rig as an off-road production vehicle. It's designed for that specific use. So I'm right in the middle of actually installing a secondary battery system so we can charge cameras and run monitors and stuff like that. Even putting on an awning so we can use it as a base camp and stuff like that.
Oh
But
wow!
yeah, no, I've got her name is Lyudmila, named for the Russian sniper in World War II. The greatest killer of fascists in history. Yeah, Millie has like nice beefy tires on her and a little over 300,000 miles under the hood. So it's and still chugging along nicely. Um,
Wow!
and again, if I always come back to that idea of access, and it lets me go
Yeah.
places that other people cannot go. It lets me bring things to those places that other people could not otherwise. On Train Dreams, it was invaluable. We were able to scout locations that literally none of the other vehicles on our crew could have. Especially not while carrying, like we had a couple of Jeeps and stuff like that, but they can't carry 6 producers at the same time. Past that, I would say if there's a single most used piece of equipment I have, I'm the king of keychains. I've got like more gadgets on me at any given time. The most used item in anything are my Coyote Tan Night Eyes
Oh,
S liners. That I buy these in bulk. They're invaluable. Um, but then if we're going down the tech rabbit hole, we're talking electrics. I'll have to say my current favorite piece of tech optics. I'm all vintage. Everything I own is old and purposely so. But the first piece of camera equipment that has really blown my mind in a very long time, I sort of purposely shoot even old digital cameras. I still shoot the first generation Sony A7S because as a still photographer, it does more of what I need than the newer generations do. It's a little faster, it's a little quieter, it's much smaller. But um, modern equipment wise, I was a big hater of, and still am, of the Fuji crop sensor cameras, like the X100 and the X Pro and stuff like that. I just never, the quality to cost ratio was just never there. They never felt professionally viable to me. And so I initially sort of wrote off their medium format systems when they came up, but I was a big medium format film shooter. And so I really missed that in my portfolio. And so I finally ponied up and traded. I got an opportunity to trade some old gear that was just gathering dust. And I got one of the Fuji medium format sensor photo cams. I got the Fuji GFX 50S2 or 52S, one of the two. Um, but the camera, it's for probably one generation back, but it's 50 megapixels, which is far more than I will ever need. If they made the
wow!
camera in 36 megapixels, I'd actually prefer it. Um, but it was the first actual camera I've shot in the better part of a decade. And I've literally, there's not a single camera that's been on the market in 15 years that I have not personally tested. I can say that
Hmm.
almost concretely. And I've owned the Hasselblad X1D medium format system for a while. I've owned the Pentax 645Z medium format for a while, which again was an awesome camera. The quality wise, probably the best quality camera I've ever owned, but it was just a tank. It just weighed a ton. It was this big end to end with lens on it. Um,
Yeah.
so it was, and it also was incredibly loud, which for my job is not fun. So the Fuji medium format mirrorless system really blew my mind, and I was able to pair it with far more lenses than I expected, and was able to use vintage medium format, or even use some of my 35 millimeter lenses, but be able to expand their field of view. And so yeah, that if I had to choose a single piece of tech on the modern side that's not an LA cruiser, it would definitely be the Fuji medium format systems. I've been very, very impressed. I now leave the house without a flashlight. This is the Wuben X3 Owl. So it's a little swivel
I love
head
it.
flashlight. It's got a magnetic base, great clip. It's got all sorts of different modes. I like that the body
Nice.
glows when I turn it on my tom, even if it's on low mode. This is my favorite flashlight I've ever owned. Everyone on my set should have it. You can use it as a headlamp. I actually usually wear it on my pocket or on my suspenders, so I can just like turn it
Yeah.
on and be hands free. But yeah, if we're talking gadgets, this is my favorite gadget.
How does it's a Wuvan X3
Wuben, that's
owl?
WUBEN X3, and this is the
BEN.
transparent model, which also glows in the dark, because I love anything that glows in the dark. But specifically, there's actually a company that I'm kind of loyal to called CountyCom, the COUNTYCOMM, that does amazing everyday carry gadgets and high utility. Uh, like they sort of do like government contract overrun, so they'll like design custom titanium screwdrivers for the Air Force. That once the Air Force has bought as many as they need, they will then sell the extras on CountyCom. So you can get these really amazing high-end tools for relatively little money. And they actually have their own version of the WooBat right now. That I believe it is bright orange and about $90. It's a pretty bitchin' piece of equipment. Yeah, this thing, I never leave the house without it. I use it when I'm working on my car. I use it for all my cameras. Like it's either living on, like I said, my suspender in my pocket or actually on my camera strap a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's a really great, this high quality utility item, and it's just murderously bright. It actually has a little readout screen on the top that tells you how many lumens it's at.
Oh, nice.
And
Yeah.
the medium is 150, so like I think the maximum is 700. So it gets a little terrifying.
How long does the battery last?
This one, it depends on how much you use it, but usually I run it at 150 lumens, and I'm just running it a little bit at a time. So I've had it last
Okay.
couple of weeks.
Nice.
And the nice thing is this one specifically recharges via contact. So you just set it down on a charging pad, and it also comes with a battery case. So in my car, I just have a battery case. So if this is running low, I can just drop it in the case and it'll just recharge. So it's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Pretty cool piece of it. Love a gadget. I'm the king of gadgets. You'll never catch me without all of my trinkets. I've always got
I'm with you on that one.
flashlight. Always got a pocket knife.
Yeah.
You always got something.
Yep. All right. This question will be an interesting one from your perspective. What are your thoughts on AI?
I am deeply interested and equally annoyed. So my whole thing is I have a kind of an interesting angle on AI because my little brother works in the Web3 world. He works in the sort of NFT Web3 kind of ecosystem. I consult a lot of that stuff, so he's very well aware of AI. As a kid who grew up with learning disabilities, who from a very young age had to rely on technology to express myself. One of the first pieces of technology that was a true, like, emotional, like, took a weight off my shoulders. Oh my God, I can express myself for the first time piece of tech was a thing called Dragon Dictate. And it was one of the earliest, like, voice recognition dictation softwares. And for the first time in my life, before I learned how to type, I could just say what I wanted to say and it would show up on a page. I just had to change it a little. So AI assistance is something I have been incredibly excited for my entire life. Any of those elements where it's taking out the busy work, where it's streamlining a process, where it's allowing me to be more creative because it is supporting me, I am so excited. I am so invested. That is the future that I am looking forward to, is when I can say to my phone, hey, blah, 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 and I can just chat something out and it just dictates it all and make sure it's all clean and correct. And I can essentially just like while I'm driving, I have an idea. I can, hey Siri, and then just like, because I often will have an entire idea for a script while I'm driving cross country. Siri just turned on in the background.
Yeah.
But literally one of my, for years it's been, I would make a voice note and then I'd have to go back and type up the voice note. But now with things like Otter and Claude and there's all these sort of things out there, and I'm trying to sort of find one that I really like, I'm very, very excited on that front. Now, where I think the mistake is that there's sort of this creative burn in a lot of non-creative people have a baseline distaste or frustration for creative people. Specifically, let me rephrase that. A lot of very rich, non-creative people have a baseline disdain for people who can be creative. And I saw this when I worked at Leica, that there was a lot of very, very high-end clients who desperately wanted to be artists, and because of the various reasons, they were incapable of it. one of the things I always joke is the core reason why you like. There's a lot of people who end up incredibly rich and can't figure out why their artwork doesn't appeal to anyone, and it's because there's a deep detach to their sense of empathy. That because they've lost their ability to empathize and exist in the ecosystem with their fellow man, the work they make feels detached. It feels like it's made from the outside. The current state of AI actually almost feels like a punishment for that. That the people steering the AI conversation are like, well, you know what? I don't need an illustrator. I don't need a writer. I can do this. And they can't. So they have a machine that is functionally like the thing people never remember about things like ChatGPT is, or ChatGPT less so, but things like, what's that? What's the one? I actually found out that my photograph, I have a Flickr account with over 75,000 photos that got scraped by one of them. I'm forgetting which one. But essentially, the thing people have to remember is that these AI image agglomerators, they're plagiarism machines. That's it. That they are taking work, unsolicited, unpaid, running it through algorithms, stripping as much data away from it as they can to make it apparent, and then it's popping up. Like if you search almost any of those things, if you try to generate a soccer image, without fail, 100% of the time, the Getty Image logo shows up in the AI. Like, so it just shows how, like,
yeah.
And the thing is, again, I think it's an overcorrection. I think it is people who have difficulty playing that empathy card in the context of art are trying to remove that element and do it themselves, and it's so immediately obvious to anyone with a soul. And I think what it yields is, I think in the long run, there is an incredible degree of utility and potential for AI tools. I use AI tools all the time lately. On just the other day, when I was working on the AI denoise in Lightroom is miraculous, truly. The AI frame extension, incredible. Like I had an image the other day that I had to crop that I was like, shit. And like, there was just no way I had to fit the image in with text. And I was just like a little bit off where I placed the head. And like, now I can fit, and I selected the missing area, autofill, and it was perfect. That kind of thing, I find, again, in professional context, in creative context, very satisfying. And as long as we're clear and in control of it as creative people, I'm totally fine. The problem is, at current, you have a lot of spiteful, uncreative people trying to sort of... It really does feel like they're kind of punishing artists for not letting them be artists. And say, like, look what I can do. Like, there's an actual movement on Twitter called Break the Pencil, which was AI artists against real illustrators. That illustrators were finding out having this. So hashtag Break the Pencil actually showed up with, like, where it was AI artists specifically targeting artists and flooding to, like, in the style of blah blah blah. And so if you search that artist, all you would find was the AI stuff. So it just, at its core, there's this weird, mean-spirited Elon Musk bullshit baseline. It just, again, it comes from being someone who is deeply uncreative, a little petty, kind of sad. But at the same time, I think as creative people, we have endless potential to make content utilizing those tools that allow us to do things like for podcasting. Like, I remember seeing the first time I saw that AI podcast editor, I was like, wow. Like, the fact that you can have 4 cameras, 4 microphones, and it will do your pre-cut for you. A thing that I used to spend days doing, it'll now do in 20 minutes. So now it gets me back to being creative faster. Those things that dial back the busy work and allow me to be more creative, that's where I'm really excited.
Yeah, I saw there's a new AI tool that will take your photograph and you can create a scene based on your photograph and it'll duplicate it. I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me.
See, and in some ways, I'm actually, even stuff like that, I'm kind of excited for in certain contexts, because it's someone who puts together pitch decks and someone who, like, if I went out and did a series of photographs in the style that I want Boots and Braces to be in, but then someone's like, hey, could you cut together a sizzle reel for us? Well, now instead of having to dig through and steal movie clips to make that sizzle reel, I can take my photographs and generate a sizzle, like a minute long sizzle reel that is never going to be shown publicly. It's only going to be an internal thing. And in those contexts, that's incredible. Would I ever want that shit to get out in the world? Absolutely not. Because that's just not. I want it as a proof of concept. I want it as a tool, not as a replacement for my effort.
I kind of saw it as like more of on the lines of like, this could be used as like a previs, right? Visualization and trying to get
in the context of previs, in the context of proof of concept, that kind of stuff is amazing. Being able to plan stuff out. Even a tool that I saw recently that I was really blown away by was a system with the new Mavic drone where you can swap out the head on it and run a LiDAR pass. So you can scan an entire building in LiDAR, and then using AI calculation, you can say like, all right, I want it to go from this room to this room. Give me a pathway. And it will create a AI previs of that flight for you. So then you can just go back, creatively tweak it, switch it out for the normal camera instead of the LiDAR camera, and run that same thing. And it's steadier than any operator could ever have done that move. And so in those moments where it is a utility, I am endlessly excited.
That's awesome. Daniel, thank you so much. DS Schaeffer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Call me whatever you want, just don't call me late for dinner.
Where can people reach you? And I want to know, where can people see your photographs from your poetry slam?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm easy to find. Just look up DS Schaeffer on things like IMDb or Instagram. Daniel Schaeffer on Facebook. You can find, I have a couple of different Instagrams you can dig through to find me. So Outlier Imagery is going to be my photography. The Rosie Rebby, REBE, is my personal one. So that's if you want photos of like my dog and the woods and things I'm eating, go to the Rosie Rebby. And then for all things We Few, for all things filmmakers of Eastern Washington, look up We Few. That's we_F.E.W. And just look up We Few Filmmakers of Eastern Washington across any other platforms. We're pretty accessible and we're building out our presence. We just got TikTok. We haven't quite figured that out yet. Yeah, I'm easy to find. I'm easy to get a hold of. As far as my photography goes, if you go to Outlier Imagery, you go down to the projects section. There's a section called Brave New Voices that has the poetry photography. And there's a lot of things sections. There's a section from my time in Florence, Italy. There's a section from some of the work I did in Cuba. Probably the three largest sections would probably be portraits. That's been my main bag for the bulk of my career. So I'm very proud of the work in the portrait section. That's shot on hundreds of different lenses, hundreds of different cameras all over the world. Streets is the same thing. It's like every camera you can imagine, every lens you can imagine. Just about every place I've ever traveled is documented in the street folder. And then sort of my secret favorite folder, the one I'd say, like, actually to me proves my skill as a photography is my places section. And so in a lot of ways I talk about how it becomes a lot easier for a photographer to make creative work when they're not the only one making it. So anytime you have a subject and there's another person in frame, because it becomes about that person, they share some of the sort of creative responsibility of that photo. So the photography that I find the most compelling as a creator is often stuff like landscape. So in places, there's no people, all it is the front. Nice. That's the only thing I have control over is what is in between those four corners. And in a lot of ways, I actually think that's the work that shows off my skill as a photographer the best. And yeah, on that website, there's some great behind the scenes stuff. The behind the scenes stuff is a couple years out of date because I have to wait on embargoes to lift. Until a film is released, I can't release a lot of the imagery. But so there will be new updates on Outlier Imagery on my Instagram. Is usually the thing that gets updated first, and then my website accordingly. But yeah, we have a lot of fun stuff going on, and I encourage anyone in the Eastern Washington corner of the world. to come through and check out any of the events we're working on. Come tour Studio A, where I have my office, where we produce a lot of our local TV and film stuff. Come tour the project we're doing, the swamps down below the Northtown Mall. And then, yeah, our next mixer, I don't know when this is going live, but our next one is August 18th. One after that is September 15th, and September 15th is also that 10 years Z Nation anniversary. And I'll be there, so come through and say hi.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
really
sir.
Appreciate it.
And we'll put all the links in the show notes too.
Beautiful. Glad to hear it.
All right. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, sir.